you should be very suspicious of these sob stories when they come out. Oh, such and such restaurant fired 1,000 people, or blah, 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 right? You should be very suspicious, especially when they come from, politically motivated corporations.
Which side are you on? Which side are you on?
So one of the big stories in the last week has been that the libs in California have put 10,000 fast food workers out of a job due to their new crazy, unrealistic $20 an hour minimum wage that went into effect in April. That's what some folks are saying, but is it true? We're going to evaluate that claim and give a little bit of background as well. So the claim itself originated from the Wall Street Journal, and specifically they said that jobs were down 1.3% between September and January, specifically in the limited service sector of the restaurant industry. Now, immediately, as I'm looking into this, and you may have noticed this as well, you might have a question. You might say, Jake, you just said the law went into effect in April, but you're saying that the claim is that the jobs were lost from September to January, which January is months before the hike is set to take place. And, that's a good question, actually. That's a good question, and the people putting this stuff out are not giving an answer to it. The Wall Street Journal, the Hoover Institution, the New York Post, and the California Council of Bosses have all been primary instigators in throwing this claim around, and none of them explain exactly why it is that the minimum wage, which went into effect in April, caused 10,000 job losses between September of the year prior and January. But just to give the benefit of the doubt, I suppose you could say, if they were asked, that perhaps the restaurants are preparing to right size before the law takes effect. They're getting their house in order because they're seeing this coming down the pike. They know that they're not going to be able to, to afford this, and so they're making these preparations ahead of the expected change. Okay, so we're just going to stipulate that, and we're going to put a pin in it. What I want to help folks understand is seasonality. Seasonality is a very important thing in a lot of industries. Some businesses are going to have more staff during some parts of the year than others because they have more business in some parts of the year than others. A prime example of this is going to be lawn mowing, right? A lawn cutting business, a lawn care business, is going to have significantly more work in the spring than in the fall. So it would make sense that a lot of these businesses, now there may be some who have arrangements that kind of like teachers do, where they pay for, the season's work over 12 months. I'm sure that there are some places like that, but there are probably also a lot of places that hire in the spring and fire in the fall, right? And so when those folks are fired in the fall, it doesn't say anything in and of itself about any laws or policies or anything that may or may not have changed that fall or in the months preceding or succeeding it, right? What you want to do to check and see if, when seasonally adjusted, the numbers are meaningfully different, right? That's what you want to do if you want to try to analyze impact. So if the lawn care industry, for example, were to shed $20,000 a year every single fall, like clockwork, then if they were to shed, let's say, 15,000 jobs in 1 year, that is not indicative of a negative trend, right? In fact, actually, shedding 15,000 jobs as opposed to 20,000 jobs might be indicative of a positive trend, right? That's how you want to analyze industries that have seasonality. And I'm sure, if you're smart, you might know where I'm going with this, so we're just going to go out and say it. These numbers that are being thrown around by the California bosses, by the Wall Street Journal, by the Hoover Institution, all these fancy pants, Harvard-educated business people, were not seasonally adjusted, actually. In fact, every single year, the job numbers peak in the fall and they decline through January before beginning to bounce back again, right? And if you're gonna, look, if folks that are really listening, you're gonna notice that, they peak in the fall and then they decline through January. Jake, that's exactly the period that you just told me was highlighted by the Wall Street Journal. And that's right. You get an award because that's exactly what happened. That is exactly what happened. The Wall Street Journal took numbers from every single year this happens, there are thousands of jobs that are shed in the restaurant industry in California from August and September to January. This happens like clockwork religiously in the service sector in California. And so the Wall Street Journal highlighted this annual trend and tried to say that this was due to the change in the minimum wage. But actually, if you look at the numbers season to season, which is what you should be doing, you should not be comparing the numbers in August of 2023 to the numbers in November of 2023, right? That doesn't make sense. You should be comparing August of 2023 to August of 2022 and September of 2023 to September of 2022 and so on and so forth. You should be comparing like months in different years. And actually, if you look at the period highlighted by the Wall Street Journal, in every single month of the period highlighted, limited service sector employment, which was the employment that they were highlighting, was up every single month that they highlighted. September 2023, more limited service sector workers than September 2022. The same for August. The same for October, November, December, January, February, March, and April, the latest month for which we have data. And it's worth noting, when the minimum wage actually took effect, there were more fast food jobs in California than the year before. Every single month, right? That's notable. That's notable, and actually says that the exact opposite is happening of what the Wall Street Journal is saying is happening. So look, the latest month that we have data on is April. Could things change? Hypothetically, could things change in May? Maybe. It's possible. Anything is possible. Could things change when the June data comes out? Maybe, I don't know, right? I can't see the future. I'm not a psychic, right? We're going to have to see what happens. But currently, there is not cause for concern. There is, in fact, no negative trends in the limited service sector in California.
Hey, 5 seconds. Just wanted to say that this is only possible because of our donors. If you want to see more of this, then consider donating yourself at tvlr.fm/donate.
I just want to highlight another aspect of this story that was pointed out by Michael Hiltzik in the Los Angeles Times. These numbers have been trotted around by the restaurant bosses and their allied associations, including in a full-page ad that they purchased in USA Today across California, highlighting individual stories, right? So they have this big headline, 10,000 jobs lost. In memoriam was the ad. In memoriam for the 10,000 jobs lost. And so then under that statistic, they have all of these individual stories. One of those stories was Rubio's Bar and Grill. And digging into this story is going to help illustrate why, absent good statistics to back up these stories, you should be very suspicious of these sob stories when they come out. And when you hear, such and such restaurant fired 10,000 or 1,000 people, or they had to lay off 100 workers, or blah, 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 right? You should be very suspicious every time you hear an individual story about what, you should be suspicious of the broader conclusions that you should draw from this individual story, especially when they come from, politically motivated corporations. So here's from the Los Angeles Times. Rubio's Coastal Grill, on June the 3rd, the Carlsbad chain confirmed that it had closed 48, almost 50 of its California restaurants, which is about 1/3 of its 134 locations. That's a lot, right? That's wow. As my colleague, this is the Los Angeles Times talking, as my colleague Don Lee reported, Rubio's attributed the closings to the rising cost of doing business in California. Another way to interpret that is the soon-to-come minimum wage increase, right? So, wow, there's, what else is there to say, Jake? They said it right there. And why shouldn't we trust the bosses? The bosses said this is why they're getting rid of all the jobs, so that must be why they're getting rid of all the jobs. But the LA Times points out that there is more to the story. The biggest expense that Rubio's has been facing is debt, a burden that has grown since the chain was acquired in 2010, 14 years ago, by private equity firm Mill Road Capital. By 2020, the chain owed $72.3 million, and it filed for bankruptcy. Indeed, its full declaration with the bankruptcy court filed on June 5th. In that declaration, the company acknowledged that along with increases in the minimum wage, it was facing a, quote, unsustainable debt burden. So, difficulties with increases in the minimum wage, but an unsustainable debt burden. And yet, it is not the unsustainable debt burden that you hear trumpeted around by the conservative, media and anti-worker type folks. It's the, allusion to the minimum wage increases. The LA Times continues, the company emerged from bankruptcy at the end of 2020 with settlements that included a reduction in its debt load. Then came the pandemic, a significant headwind. Among its struggles, again, was debt, $72.9 million owed to its largest creditor, TREW Capital Management, a firm that specializes in lending to distressed restaurant businesses. It filed for bankruptcy again on June 5th, 2 days after it announced its store closings. The case is pending. It's worth noting that high debt is often a feature of private equity takeovers. That's actually a big part of what happened in the Red Lobster case, why Red Lobster is going under. In such cases, saddling an acquired company with debt gives the acquirers a means to extract cash from their companies, even if it complicates the company's path to profitability. Whether that's a factor in Rubio's recent difficulties is not clear. So, there you go. There's some analysis of the statistics, little digging in a little bit deeper into one of the individual stories. But back to the statistics, just to further combat some of the common misunderstandings about the minimum wage, it's worth looking at the record in California as it relates to jobs and the minimum wage, because California has actually been steadily increasing their minimum wage from about $9 an hour in 2015 to now $16 an hour across the state, plus the new $20 an hour minimum wage for fast food work and some even higher minimum wages in cities. Has the increase in the minimum wage cut jobs at all? At all, even once, since it began increasing? The answer to that, as you might expect from my incredulous tone, is no, actually. In fact, every single year, except for 2020, and except for 2020 because, the pandemic, right? Everything, there was a lot of job cuts in 2020. Not illustrative of anything to do with the minimum wage. So, in every single year since they began increasing the minimum wage in 2015, fast food jobs rose. Since the minimum wage began rising in 2015, they have added about 150,000 new fast food jobs total in California, an increase of employment in the sector of about 25%. 1 in 4 fast food jobs in California that exist today did not exist in 2015 when they began raising the minimum wage. So why is this happening? Isn't it simple economics 101 that if workers make more, then there's going to be less jobs? Actually, not really. Studies have not borne that out, that increasing minimum wages, is going to actually have negative impacts on. There has actually not been really any studies showing any sort of significant or statistically meaningful decrease in jobs from higher minimum wages. Actually, and some of the reasons for this is that higher pay means lower turnover. It means helping address labor shortages, filling filling positions, and then that when you fill positions, you're going to be able to more efficiently do the job. Higher productivity. It's going to boost morale, et cetera, et cetera. The next question is about automation, and the technology is just still not cost effective. Even according to CEOs, there was a McDonald's CEO of a franchise in California was asked about automation, and they said it's just not there. It's going to be another several years before it's even possibly cost effective. So, and to the extent that restaurants have automated or modernized, we have some of these. We have like order panels sometimes in restaurants now, and that's including in Alabama, might I say. There are restaurants that I go into today that people do not take your order. You put in your own order in Alabama, where the minimum wage is $7.25. So it's really not, it is not really indicative of increasing automation when your minimum wage is higher. But nevertheless, where that has happened, it has done less job cutting, at least in the fast food industry, and more of a reallocation of resources. So if a task takes 50% less time, what we've seen in the restaurant industry is, and this is not to say that this is always going to happen, it's just to say what has happened, is less that they cut 50% of the jobs associated with that task, and rather that they employ the employee, they have the employee doing something else with that time, right? So if it takes me 50% less time, then instead of, firing me or whatever, they've just got me doing something else to try to increase, the customer experience and blah, 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 right? There's always something that you can be doing in a restaurant. I know because I worked in a restaurant for several years, and there's always something that somebody can be doing. And so that's actually what we've seen. We've seen automation not really killing jobs, just reallocating human resources. So there we go. That's kind of what's been happening with the minimum wage. People have been, either lying about the job cuts, or they don't understand, or they haven't done much reading about it. But yeah, now you know. It's not true. Actually, the minimum wage has led to 10,000 job losses in the state of California. Actually, jobs have continued to increase in the fast food sector in California ever since 2015. You just saw a clip from the Valley Labor Report. We are live every Saturday morning from 9:30 a.m. till 12:30 p.m. And we pride ourselves on keeping all of our content free to everybody so that we can talk to as many working folks as possible. If you support the work that we're doing, you think that it's important, you think that it's good, then consider making a monthly contribution to the project, and you can do that on our website, tvlr.fm.
Which side are you on?